Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Helen Thomas from the CDFM study group. All right, I'm going to be going over CDFM module 1.1. Again, repetition, repetition, repetition. So if you notice, I'm going over some of the same information, but I'm attacking it from a different perspective. So this is what you have to do when you study so that your brain you can train your brain to remember the information no matter what direction the question comes from. So government, RM, environment. All right, so I'm going to go through this information here. Let me get my little pointer. So we talked about the laws, Articles of Confederation being the precursor to the Constitution. Remember the Declaration of Independence, all of that came before the actual Constitution. This is the foundation again, understanding the Constitution. It established the three branches of government: legislative, executive, judicial. That is the order you need to learn them, because legislative is directly related to Article 1, executive related to Article 2, judicial is related to Article 3. It makes it easier for me to remember Article 1, Article 2, Article 3, legislative, executive, judicial, makes the laws, executes the laws, interprets the laws. All of that's covered right in here. So this is the same information I covered on the earlier slide, but it was done in a different way. And that's what's going to happen when you take the exam. The exam, again, 80 questions, 2 hours. You're not going to be able to use the book. You can't have your phone. You might be lucky if they give you pen and paper, if you have to do some calculation, but for the most part, it's just you and that computer, and they ask you the question, multiple choice, and you have to answer give the best response. Because with these questions, it's not that one of your answers may be wrong, is wrong or right. It might be you have the best response. Which is the best response? So keep that in mind. When you take the exam, is to focus, read every question. I tell people I take my finger and I point and every word to make sure that I'm reading what's in front of me and not what my brain tells me that's on that paper or the computer. So how do you propose legislation? I discussed this earlier in Module 1, is you have bills for general proposals, joint resolution. Let's say they want to change something in the Constitution. Both sides of Congress have to then come together in a joint resolution. Concurrent resolution, when you have matters that affect both the House and the Senate. Remember, every committee has a House committee and a Senate committee. And then simple resolution, meaning it only affects one side or the other side. So there's a difference between and. Concurrent means and, both of them, or simple resolution is either or, one or the other. So this is how you propose legislation. Also, when you go through the study guide, you will see that the bills and the joint resolution must go to the president for these to become law, versus concurrent and simple resolution are things that they're trying to work out between themselves or in the House versus the Senate. So these do not go to the president. So remember when we talked about the budget resolution process, when Congress is trying to figure out what the limitations and guidelines they're going to use for the president's budget, then they do a concurrent resolution because it's going to happen in both the House and the Senate. So that's an example there. Well, who may originate legislation? There's 3 categories of individuals that can introduce a bill, introduce this resolution, joint resolution idea. It's recommended by the president, and then where does the president give his recommendation to Congress? We said earlier, during the State of the Union is where he recommends his considerations. Introduced by members of Congress. So it could be individual members of Congress that they introduce a bill, something they want to become law or to take effect, or introduced by a committee or group of people within Congress. Recommended by the president, introduced by members, introduced by committee. That's where the bills originate. So how does a bill become a law? A bill becomes a law. It starts in one of those three areas: president, introduced by a member, introduced by a committee. It is introduced and is placed in the hopper. This is a term used in the CDFM. So you get ready to submit it forward. Placed in the hopper. Then that document, that bill, is considered by that committee. Public hearings, markup, that's when you go in and they say you have congressional hearings where you go in and you justify what it is that you're requesting. Why do you think we need it? How much? Why, how much and why do we need that amount? Markup means, okay, well, of course, the members of Congress, the whole group, the deciding factors, the decision makers may not agree. They may want some things changed. So they mark up that bill. Then they give it back to the originator. Then the originator or that committee must take action. They must clean it up and submit a clean bill. So once that's cleaned up, House and Senate floor consideration. Each side reviews the bill. As I mentioned, the same action that happens on the House side also happens on the Senate side. It originates on the House side. It also got to happen on the Senate side, because only one bill in identical forms got to be sent forward. So once the bill has been passed by one body, let's say the House passed it, they agree with it, and it's still on the Senate side to be voted on. If it's passed on one side, the bill is called an engrossed bill. As I mentioned, the House and the Senate do not always agree. So there are instances where they come together to resolve differences. When the House and the Senate comes together to resolve differences, it doesn't matter how many people they bring to the table, they're speaking on the behalf of the House or on behalf of the Senate. They speak as one for their group. So the conference committee or the third chamber, their goal is to come to a consensus, to pick one bill, make a decision so that that one bill can go forward in identical form. The final step after the bill has been passed in identical form between both the House and the Senate is then that bill is enrolled. So we talk about hopper, clean bill, engross, the third chamber, it's enrolled and sent to the president for approval or veto. Well, what does the president do when? All right, so what presidential action? What are the things that the president can do once he gets the bill? He can either approve and sign the bill, no issue there, and it becomes law. And then I'm going to go from there and I'm going to come down to the veto, since it's either he approve and sign it, good, or he can veto. He does not favor any portion of it. He sends it back. Note, Congress has the ability to override the veto. If 2/3 votes of Congress can agree on that bill, they can override this presidential veto. And I put a note here because in 1996, as I mentioned in earlier videos, is that the Line Item Veto Act was put into place. It was granted to President Clinton and it was declared unconstitutional in 1998, so 2 years later, because what it did is when the bill came on President Clinton's desk, if he did not agree with a portion of the bill, he was allowed to line through that item, mark it out, delete it, sign it, and the bill became law. And of course, who would then determine if something is constitutional or not? It goes to the courts, and the courts determine that that was not constitutional. They can't just mark through part of the bill they didn't like, sign it, and it makes sense. So they took that away. So if the president vetoes a bill, any portion of it, the entire bill must go back to the originator. So you have two scenarios here: does not sign but allows the bill to become law, and a pocket veto. The scenario here is, remember, 10 days. When the president gets the bill, if Congress is in session, the president has 10 days to sign the bill. If he doesn't sign it, it automatically becomes law. So it may be a topic or something small that the president, you know what, I don't want to waste any energy on this. Just let it sit there, let the 10-day pass, it automatically becomes law. And the scenario here says Congress must be in session for it to automatically become law, because the opposite of this is the pocket veto. If Congress is not in session, the president receives a bill and doesn't sign it within 10 days, that bill does not automatically become law. So make sure you know the differences between does not sign but allows the bill to become law and the pocket veto. Congress must either be in session or adjourned for either one of these to occur. Let's go on to the next slide. All right, the federal budget process. So we talked about the phases: budget formulation, congressional action, and execution, right? So on budget formulation, OMB issues guidance. They issue it through the OMB Circular A11. OMB and DOD gets together in the fall review to discuss the budget, the DOD budget. And then once OMB makes the final decision on the budget they're going to send forward, it's published in the OMB passback document. The president makes the final decision, and then the president's budget, by law, must be submitted to Congress no later than the first Monday in February, prior to the upcoming fiscal year that starts 1 October. Part of that budget formulation process not listed here is the part when I said that the House Budget Committee and the Senate Budget Committee have to do the budget resolution process, where they determine that limitation they're going to use. The CBO, Congressional Budget Office, gives them all the data, financial data, and then they make a decision on what guidelines they're going to use when they look at the president's budget. Congressional action. Once Congress goes through the actual actions, the House Armed Services Committee and, I'm sorry, like what was that? Okay, the budget resolution process is explained here. CBO, no later than April 15th. Then the authorization process. The House and Senate Armed Services Committee authorizes programs. That's the primary purpose. Even if funding is listed in the authorization process, you do not get funding. You do not get budget authority from the authorization process. Remember, budget resolution process does not go to the president. That's them deciding. Concurrent budget resolution happening both sides, deciding what the guidelines are going to be. And then the authorization process ends when it goes to the president for the president to sign. And then you have the authorization law to authorize the programs. Then the third part is you have the appropriation process handled by the House and Senate Appropriations Committee. They approve the 12 appropriations. And of the 12 appropriations handled by the HAC and the SAC, House and Senate Appropriations Committee, there are 3 appropriation committees that directly impact the Department of Defense. That's the Defense Appropriation, Military Construction Veterans Affairs Committee, and the Energy and Water Development. So it provides an opportunity for agencies to revise their estimate. Because remember, A budget estimate submission is often turned in about 18 to 24 months before that process actually begins, about 18 months before the fiscal year begins. So there's a window of opportunity for agencies to revise their original estimates when they submit to Congress. Oftentimes what we see or what we get here is a continuing resolution. 1 October, Congress does not appropriate the funds. And again, Article 1, Section 9 says I can't take any money out of the Treasury unless I have an appropriation law. So the fix for that, if I don't have an appropriation law, is I have to institute a continuing resolution, a temporary appropriation law, stopgap. It prevents the government from shutting down. So it gives a temporary. We are limited to the rate of operation that we used the prior year, however much we spent on the prior year. Next, the Appropriations Act. So once the appropriation process ends with the appropriation bill going to the president to give us budget authority, the president must sign it, it becomes law, and then voila, we have budget authority to spend the money. And it's guided, limited by purpose, time, and amount. See, this is how you tie in your fiscal law to it. Every appropriation has a specific purpose, time, and amount governed on, and let's see if I remember, 31 U.S. Code 1301, 1502, and amount is governed under 1341, 1342, and 1517. That's the 31 U.S. Code. So two things happens when Congress appropriates. So now we're in the budget execution phase, right? President signed it, we got an appropriation, we got budget authority, that means we're going to get funding. Two things happen. OMB negotiates apportionment. So remember when I did the diagram earlier, I said that the agencies, the first thing is the agencies submit an SF-132 within 10 days. They send it to OMB to negotiate their apportionment. Just because Congress appropriated a certain amount of funding does not mean that OMB is going to give you all of that funding that they appropriated. We just know it doesn't work that way. And then once OMB gets all the apportionment SF-132s within that 10 days, OMB then has 30 days to act on the apportionment request. So all of these are subject to the Anti-Deficiency Act, 31 U.S. Code. Then the second thing that happened once Congress appropriates the fund is the Treasury issues the appropriation warrant or the Treasury warrant. Maybe use, either word may be used. So what it does is it notifies the agencies of the amount that was approved and that their accounts have been set up because we have an appropriation law in place. The key here with the Treasury warrant is issuance of the appropriation warrant is the first legal action after the president signs the bill into law. It is tied to Article 1, Section 9 of the Constitution. So if you don't remember none of the articles, you definitely should know this one because it plays a major role in when we get funding. So part of the budget execution is the Impoundment Control Act of 1974. What it does, it prohibits the president. So when Congress appropriates the funds, this law says that the president cannot withhold funds just for any reason without prior approval from Congress. The president can't say, well, Congress appropriated funds to do X, Y, Z, but I want to do A, B, C with it. So deferrals mean we can request postponement of the funds because by the time the funds are appropriated, we may not have a need for it. So we may have to go back to Congress and request the ability to move those funds and shift those funds to something else. So president required to send notice to Congress of a proposed deferral. If Congress does not notify the president within 45 days to release the funds may be deferred. He can postpone it, meaning I don't want to spend it right now, but I can use it a little bit later in the fiscal year. So Congress has 45 days to respond to the president on these deferrals. Rescissions mean the president wants to cancel a fund, something that Congress approved, but the president doesn't need it, so cancellation of funds. Funds may be withheld pending approval from Congress to cancel or change the fund use. If both houses of Congress does not approve the rescission within 45 days of continuous congressional session, the funds must be released and made available for original obligation. This means the president cannot cancel funds and use them for something else. So with this one, rescissions, you can't cancel funds, you have to respond. All right, so end of the execution. So I reiterated here in this diagram. Congress appropriates, OMB apportions on the SF-132, then DOD, whenever they get their apportionment, they issue allotment. Then we commit funds, administrative reservation of funds, obligate funds, legal reservation of funds, and outlay. We're spending, we're taking money out of the treasury to pay our bills, and then quarterly, the DOD has to submit an SF-133 on the execution of those funds. And then we have to have oversight, because again, you can put laws into place, you can put rules into place, and if you don't have an oversight body, somebody that's auditing, evaluating, checking, chances are might not do what Congress told us to do with the appropriation. So that is the function of the Government Accountability Office, the GAO. It's an independent auditing agency that works directly for Congress to provide oversight of the executive branch of the funds that were approved. The leader of the GAO's title is the Comptroller General, CG. So anytime you see CG in the study guide, it does not mean Commanding General. It means Comptroller General, and that is the title of the person in charge of the GAO. So I wanted to end with looking at the structure of the federal budget in a quick snapshot. The federal budget, revenue, that's what the money coming in, the majority, 50%, half of all the money that comes into the government comes from individual income tax. And for those of us who work full time, you notice a little Social Security, Medicare coming out, because 34% comes from Social Security and Medicare. And then 10% comes from corporate income tax, 3% other. So I would not tell you to sit there and try to memorize every percentage, because again, when you're taking an exam, the nerves alone just for taking an exam and somebody watching you and you're trying to remember, that alone would make you forget, trust me. As much as I've been through this information, and last year when I did the acquisition portion, I did mine at home on the computer, and then the proctor, I knew the proctor was there watching me, and I couldn't move for 2 hours, and I was like, oh, I gotta scratch, whoa, what I do? So that alone, all those things that you go through when you're trying to take a test, in order to alleviate that, focus on understanding for the revenue, the major pockets of revenue comes from individual income tax, Social Security, Medicare. The bills that the government pays, the United States government, expenses, 70% of the bills that we have are direct mandatory bills. And for us, we say must funds. So of the money that we make, 70% are mandatory bills. And only 30% is left as discretionary spending. So think about it on a personal level. When you get paid, I got to pay my car note, my car insurance. I got to pay for my house. I got to make my car payment. I got to pay childcare. There's certain things that you have to pay. Again, if you want to have a roof over your head, you want to be able to drive. Those are mandatory bills. The discretionary bill is, well, how much do you spend on food, to go out and eat, buy some nice clothes. That's discretionary spending. So in the government, only 30% of what we spend is left for discretionary spending. And it gives you here the breakdown for the mandatory bills, Social Security, Medicare, so all those people that are on Social Security, and some of them never work a day in their life, but because of some illness, they may be getting Social Security. The majority of that mandatory bill is paid out in Social Security. Now let's talk about that 30% when we talk about discretionary. So the money comes in, and then we have 30% to spend of our spending is spent on discretionary bills. But of that 30%, look at here, DOD, Department of Defense, gets more than half, right? Because 15.3% is a little bit more than a half is spent by the Department of Defense. And 14.7%, that's your Department of State, Department of Education, Department of Homeland Security. They all are left to figure out to get 14.7%. So you can see, it's not really equal, right? So if you notice, whenever the government talked about cutting back expenses, it makes sense that the first partaker, the first place they're going to look to cut expenses is the defense budget, because we're spending more than half of that discretionary budget or discretionary spending. So again, this was just another oversight of the government resource management environment to kind of help you to better understand the information. And again, repetition, repetition, repetition. So please consider subscribing to our YouTube page. As you review the videos, please click like, leave a comment. Please make sure it's not anything crazy. Make sure you either thank us, you say how good the videos are, or if there's something you see that may be wrong on the video. Again, I'm doing this all by myself, so I might miss something. Feel free to leave a comment to let me know, hey, you need to look at this video. I can't hear you, I can't see you, or things don't look right on the video. The information is incorrect. You know, I read through my study guide, I did my research. Hey, you got something. I need your feedback because I cannot look at all this stuff by myself. So again, this is Helen Thomas and the CDFM study group. I thank you for stopping by, and I'll see you guys again next time.